So, welcome everyone. So here and elsewhere. So, second talk from Stefanie Zollmann this week in our XR lecture series, and she is talking about extended reality for sports. I hand over to Stefanie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Holger. Yeah, welcome back, everyone. So I will talk about extended reality for sports. And this is now a bit of a topic switched compared to all the pipes that I was discussing in the last lecture. So how is this fitting together? So basically, last time we were talking about or looking into augmented reality visualization and how this is basically a topic of visual computing. Then we looked into the topic of virtual reality videography and how we can basically extract VR content from videos. And today I will talk about extended reality for sports. And again, this is very much a topic that is containing a lot of different aspects from visual computing, such as computer vision, visualization, HCI, AI, and possibly also some computer graphics. So XR for sports. So as I was saying before, this is now a bit of a topic switch to the stuff that I was discussing in the last lecture. And one of the main reasons why I'm interested in this topic is that when I started here in New Zealand, so when we moved here to New Zealand, I was actually starting as a developer at Animation Research Limited. So this is a company here based in Dunedin, and they do actually a lot of really cool stuff in terms of sports visualization. You have some students here that are working there, so it's basically company down here, and they are for instance doing we're doing a lot of Formula One visualizations. Then they're pretty well known for the work that they are doing in sailing and for the America's Cup. And also there's like a lot of stuff going on in the area of golf, and I was actually working in stuff that was looking into visualization for snow sports, but also for cricket. And I was also working a bit in the area of city visualization, because it's also a topic that they are interested in. So it was pretty funny because when I started at ARL, actually they just won the Emmy Award for exactly this America's Cup mobile app. And I mean, I had nothing to do with this, but I back then found it very funny to just have this kind of really cool award and just posing with it. So, but this was basically one of the points in time, and I thought, oh, this is really like a really cool company to work with. And I was very much impressed because I wasn't really aware how much stuff is actually going on in New Zealand, and in particular also down here in Dunedin. And back then, I just thought this is kind of really, really surprising and really cool. So I was very lucky that I was working for them for quite some time. So what I was learning when I was working for ARL was that basically, sport is changing. And with this, also sports broadcasting is changing quite a lot. So if we look back into the time when, like a couple of more, like 10, 20 years ago, mostly sports was not so much involving a lot of technical aspects, but basically you had the actual game, and sometimes it was a bit boring for some people. But if we now look into what's happening nowadays, you have like a lot of technical content that is going, and technical effort that is going into those kind of sports events, and in particular this is going into the sport broadcasting and trying to make the whole experience much more interesting, also for people that are maybe not experts in these kind of areas, but basically for everyone. And with regards to how sports actually changing, one interesting aspect here is also that often now we don't have these kind of really big teams, but actually you have, for instance, experiences that are just trying to be a bit more personalized. So for instance, people are attaching cameras to a rider's helmet, and you really get this kind of impression or this kind of experience where you're part of the sports event. So this is from the Red Bull downhill mountain bike event, and as you can see here, it's a bit very crazy track, and I found this kind of a very impressive video because you really get this kind of impression that you're part of the live action, which is kind of cool. Similar, this is another Red Bull footage here from the Red Bull Rampage, and here, so this is happening in a national park in Utah, and again, you know, the camera is attached to the helmet, and you really can create this kind of impression that you're part of the actual action that is going on there, which I find very impressive because basically it's kind of really crazy. I would never go down these kind of mountains. It's just, I know, unbelievable what they're doing. And I think like basically having those kind of action cameras here involved is really helping to understand how crazy the tricks and the actions that they're doing actually are, because you know it's sometimes a bit hard to see if you're having this kind of more like a bird's eye view. It's hard to comprehend what's actually going on there. Actually, I really love that I'm able to talk about research and just, you know, showing some kind of crazy sports videos. So I think it's another really cool aspect of this kind of research. Looking at surf videos, another thing. Again, here we also nowadays have like a lot of cameras involved where people are actually going and diving and trying to capture the action, which is something that you can't really explore if if you're maybe at the beach. You can still see how the surfers are doing their tricks, but it's kind of really hard to actually, you know, see what they are really doing. And for instance, just this kind of difference of being in the water yourself and see like big waves. And yeah, I'm never able to go into big waves, but you know, just this kind of feeling of being in the water and seeing this kind of difference between the wave and yourself, I think is kind of yeah, very overwhelming feeling. And I think like having these kind of cameras that are now able to capture this is just adding to the experience and just making this more accessible for everyone. So I found this kind of really cool and really motivating. And then back then when I was working for ARL, one of the early projects that I was working on was involving snow sports. And again, for me, this was, I mean, like I was like a casual snowboarder, skier back then, and I still are, maybe not, but actually just seeing what kind of crazy terrains those kind of riders are going down. This was for me very overwhelming, and back then I found this like a really cool project, in particular because yeah, showing or visualizing those kind of rider actions on such a big scale was very interesting to me. So what we did back then, and this is in Switzerland, this is part of the Freeride World Tour, which was covered by Red Bull TV back then. And what we were doing here was we were actually equipping snowboarders and skiers with GPS sensors, so very accurate ones. And they had them in the backpacks, and then we were basically just getting these kind of signals from the GPS sensors into our live broadcasting studio, which was basically on top of the mountain, very much a extreme programming environment. And we were then visualizing this, for instance, on top of those kind of heli shots. And the idea behind this was, again, to transport the message what those kind of riders are actually doing. Because again, you know, it's kind of really hard if you're just, you know, standing somewhere on a distance and you just try to comprehend what's going on. In particular, if you have a couple of riders, they only appear as small points. So the question was a bit back then, what can we actually do in terms of showing their paths, comparing the different paths that the riders are taking, and also integrating additional information, for instance, what kind of, you know, slopes they are taking, and basically, yeah, all the different starting points and where they're ending up once they were finished. And so this was basically one of the early projects I worked in. This was also involving a bit of camera-based tracking. So again, the visualization that I just showed before was based on GPS sensors, where the riders had GPS sensors in their backpacks. But this often can also just add to the weight. Even if those kind of GPS sensors are not that heavy, you still have basically an additional weight, which can really make a big difference compared to having like an empty backpack. And for these kind of performances, you really want to save basically on the weight. So we're also doing some camera-based tracking. So really just, you know, doing some vision-based localization here, and those were basically the things that I was working on. So visualization of snowboarding and skiing, and also tracking in terms of finding out where those kind of people are in the video image. Another project that I was working on was cricket, and back then I found this kind of a bit funny because actually I had no idea what cricket was when I was starting there. So actually I thought it's okay, or like, you know, I had no idea what cricket is about. And I was basically just starting full on with, starting some cricket ball tracking. And back then I was getting very much immersed in cricket because I found this really amazing in terms of what kind of data is available. And this really basically creates like big opportunities in terms of visualization, because you have this kind of really huge amount of data, just comparing different players, different bowlers, and just, you know, having access to this data was for me very overwhelming. And I basically, from having no idea about cricket, I was just getting very much involved in a project. So back then I was, for instance, involved in cricket ball tracking. So this was one of the aspects that animation research was also working on, in terms of basically figuring out where those kind of balls are, are flying, what are the ball paths, how fast they are flying, and all this kind of stuff. And in order to do this, you somehow need to figure out where they are. And this is quite a challenging task, because those kind of balls can be very, very fast. So you need like, high-speed cameras. You need also like a couple of cameras if you want to create a 3D ball path, because with just one camera, you can't really tell where they are. So the idea is basically that you have a couple of cameras, and then you just use the intersection of those 2D flight paths and combine them or intersect them to get the picture 3D flight path computed. And this was one of the projects I worked on there as well. And this was very challenging, because as you can imagine, it involves a lot of different technical aspects in terms of camera synchronization, but then also computer vision in terms of figuring out where those where the boards are. Is it a ball? Is it a seagull? Stuff like this. So you really have to do quite a lot of image processing, and you have to do this in a very short time frame, because actually you need to figure out where the ball is for instance, 120 frames per second. So there's a lot of information processing going on in the background. This is just a short video that I just got from YouTube, and this is basically from the Tech Week. I was not involved in the Tech Week event here, but it nicely shows how this is working. So this is basically having a couple of kids, they're coming into the, I think it was the Edgar Center here in Dunedin, and then all the tracking cameras were basically set up, and those kind of bowling paths for those kids were reconstructed to basically demonstrate them the ability of this kind of technology. And basically they bowled the balls, and then they just got their own ball paths visualized basically immediately. So, and this basically demonstrates a bit the different, paths those kind of boards can take. I was also involved in slow motion and ball path visualization. So again, now once we have the data, so we have the ball path information in 3D, we can now do quite a lot of stuff with this. So we can, for instance, visualize them in 3D, which was basically what I showed in the technique video before. But what you can also do is you can again use this data and now overlay this back on the either broadcast footage or even some kind of slow motion footage. And in this case, you have to do again some additional computer vision registration, where you basically figure out, okay, where's the camera located with regards to our ball path, because as you can imagine, all this information is basically coming in different coordinate systems. So there is a lot of registration effort going on, which you can nicely do with broadcasting, because often those kind of cameras are static, or they're basically having some kind of predefined location and just moving in a predefined way. Or they're basically just static, which is kind of making the problem a bit easier. Then with this you can also visualize different aspects, so not only the ball paths, but also bounce points, impact points, and you can actually then just compare this to each other. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of really interesting information that is available from these kind of ball paths that you can then use for creating actually really interesting stories that are around cricket. Again, I think if cricket would not have this kind of additional visualizations, I think it would be much more boring, to be honest. I mean, I quite enjoy like going to a cricket game and just sitting there and, you know, chatting to people. But I think like having the visualizations, it's actually really helping quite a lot. And it's just bringing just much more attention to the game and what's actually happening. In particular, it's often, I mean, like for me personally, it's often even hard to see where the ball is. I mean, and this is one of the problems that those kind of visualizations are actually solving. Just another way to show the ball paths. So, and yeah, for me, again, one of the most interesting aspects back then was to just work with this kind of huge amount of data and finding new ways in terms of combining video data with statistics about the actual cricket game. So basically storing data that is related for certain events in a video sequence. How can we make it much easier for people or the operators or the content producers to now combine those kind of video sequences and create an interesting storyline. And this was very much the work I was involved when I was working for ARL. So yeah, so this is mostly for sports broadcasting, as you can see here. There's a lot of stuff happening and people are basically getting a lot of content presented. But the question is sports actually also changing for the on-site spectators? And so this is one of a video that we created or captured in the Forsyth Bar Stadium here in Dunedin in a rugby game. And as you can see here, and I assume like most of you had a similar experience already before, where you go to a game and there's actually not so much happening in terms of the additional statistics or information that you get presented. So actually you just go there and then there's the game happening, but there's not so much explanation about the actions on the field. There's no player tracking, for instance. You can't really tell sometimes who is who, and like a lot of the stuff that you actually experience if you watch a game in broadcast, like a lot of the stuff you can't really access if you're in a stadium. And I mean, Beihong, for instance, Beihong is one of our PhD students here who's working on a project. And I think when he was going to one of the matches the first time, he was highlighting that he was very surprised that there was not even like an official commentator. So I think like it's just important to notice that it's still quite a bit of a difference to what is happening in broadcast and how people are actually consuming this kind of content. So and this is basically now a bit how we started with this kind of research area, because once I started at the University of Otago, I still had this kind of really good impression, all these kind of ideas that were coming from Animation Research Limited, and I was really interested in the sport broadcasting area. But I was also very much interested in how can we actually bring stuff like this, so how can we bring these kind of more interesting statistics, interesting visualizations now to people that are going to live matches. And this was the this was how the AR Spectator project was starting. And I just tried to Photoshop here my nice colleagues into the stadium to just show how we are working. So basically, this is a project which is in collaboration with the information science people, so with Holger and Tobias. Then we have Stephen Mills, who I think I also saw in the participant list. Then Chris Button, who is a professor here at the physical education department. And then we also quite heavily collaborate with Jonathan Ventura from the Kelly Poly. And we basically have a larger group now with also some additional students. So for instance, Wei Hong is working on a project, then Louis working on a project, so he's a student that is nearly finished now. And then we basically really look into different aspects of visualization and tracking and localization for AR experiences on site in the stadium. So one of the ideas that we basically had was that a lot of people are coming into a stadium and they have their mobile phones anyway with them. So the question was a bit, why do we just use those devices and display content on the mobile devices? But this is not limited to mobile phones, but you can actually also create content or visualize content in head-worn displays, such as a HoloLens, for instance. So what we did in the project, and this is basically an ongoing project that we are still working on, we came up with this kind of bit complex system, because as you can imagine, there's a lot of stuff that is required in terms of bringing these kind of AR visualizations into the stadium to an on-site spectator. So again, if you just look into the complexity of systems that are required to do this in a sport broadcasting environment, there are basically like a lot of cameras that are all pre-calibrated, and there are a lot of different databases that are involved. And what we now need to do in terms of doing this in an AR context, so where you really have this experience on a mobile phone or a head-worn display, in this case, now we need to basically bring all these kind of different aspects together in one system where the mobile phones or the users, the on-site users, can connect, for instance, to the content creation system and basically get their personal broadcast experience. So this is the overview of our system, and it basically starts with a couple of different content sources. So what we need to have basically in terms of now creating this kind of content in a personalized way for an on-site spectator, at first we need to know a bit about the 3D environment. So where to place, for instance, content. And this is very much similar to what you would do in a broadcast environment, that you also need to have a certain 3D representation to basically figure out where you're putting content. Real-time player tracking, this is a very crucial component, and I will also talk about this later on, but actually it's not that easy to have basically real-time player tracking that is suitable for mobile AR experiences, because you really want to create stuff that is basically available immediately. And then we also integrate sports databases. So luckily we work together with, for instance, OptaPerform that provide us data. And I think this is one of the most important aspects here as well, because without the actual data, you can't really visualize anything. So this is basically what we try to combine within one system. And one of the main challenges here is now how can we actually bring all of this together into one coordinate system, because again, this is what we need for augmented reality. We somehow need to basically align this to the user's view. And the first step in terms of for doing this is now you need to bring basically all these kind of different sources that are all in different coordinate systems into one system, so that you can basically have it in a coherent representation. And for this, we have this kind of call it the on-site AR spectator content aggregator, but it's actually you can just see it as like a server application that is allowing basically content creation, and the mobile phones or the head-worn displays can then connect to this kind of content creation tool and basically access information that is important for those users. So this is the content part, and again, like a lot of different components are now coming together here. And the next step is to just add to the complexity. We somehow now need to figure out where those users are located in the stadium. So for instance, if we talk about broadcasting again, we have these kind of basically mostly static setups where you have cameras, or you have like high-tech tracked cameras where you know exactly where they are in a stadium or in an event. But the problem is we can't really assume this for spectators, because everyone is placed basically everywhere in a stadium, and we somehow need to figure out where those people are and where they are looking at. And in terms of doing this, we basically looked into two aspects here. So this is the first aspect is we need to figure out where the user is initially. So if somebody is just going to the stadium and they just take out their phones or set up their headphone displays, the first thing you need to figure out is where are those people. And this is the localization part, and then we have the tracking part. So once you figured out where they are, then you still need to basically have like a information that tells you where they're now moving to in terms of having like a smooth user experience. So we explored basically like a lot of different options here for the localization part. So for the first part, to figure out where we are, and one very cheap option that we use as our starting point basically was a user guided localization, where you basically ask the user to align themselves with the stadium environment by basically providing them some visual hints. As you can imagine, this is like very cumbersome if you don't have people that are actually knowing what they're doing. So this is not really an option. So the second thing we looked into here was to now use fiducial markers. So for instance, in this kind of stadium environments, you have a lot of information available. So for instance, advertisements and banners. And one of the questions was, can we just use this information now in terms of estimating where the users are located in the stadium? So once the users are pointing towards those kind of banners or advertisements, can we just use them for figuring out where they are? And yeah, one of the findings that we have or had from this approach was it's certainly possible to do this, but the problem is you need to be basically in a good position in terms of seeing like a full or getting like a really good view of those kind of advertisements. The problem is as soon as you're moving further away, this can be challenging. And also one of the main challenges here is, and we had this quite often in some of our experiments, was that actually you can't really assume that those advertisements are there all the time. It's also kind of tricky to figure out where they actually are located. So what you would need to do is, and every time, because all these kind of advertisements, for instance, getting painted before each match, I think, and this would mean that you would actually need to survey them every time you have a new game. And even nowadays, people are actually replacing them by virtual overlays. So sometimes you don't even have them available. So this meant that we also then looked into what can we actually do with models or 3D models of our environment. For instance, if you look up here on the roof structure, those kind of roof structures are actually very prominent. And one of our questions here was, can we actually use a 3D representation of the stadium in terms of performing a localization or registration and basically using this information to figuring out where we are located. In terms of doing this, we had to now look into creating like a really good accurate 3D model. And you can see Lewis here doing a lot of capturing. So this is one of our PhD students. And he was actually putting quite a lot of effort into creating an accurate 3D model and also data for a stadium environment. So this is one of the results of the 3D reconstructions. So we really tried to get like a really good pattern in terms of capturing the stadium and capturing like a lot of different views, and then use this kind of data for creating a 3D model and basically then using this for localization. And also created like a meshed model of this. Because of the meshed information, you can actually even do more also in terms of visualization. And luckily, we also had access to a really nice manually modeled 3D model. And now in order to bring all of those together again into one coordinate system, because as you can imagine, again, like the photogrammetry model that we did when capturing all these kind of photographs in a stadium had like a very different scale compared to, for instance, this kind of handmade model. So luckily we were supported by the School of Surveying here, and they helped us to actually create a metric scale model of the stadium, and this allowed us to basically bring all these kind of different coordinate systems also together into one, and also basically provides the opportunity to now do even some kind of geo-referenced content presentation. So those kind of options we explored in terms of figuring out where we are located in the stadium, so as a starting point. But the problem is, once you know where you are, you can't really run this kind of localization step all the time, because it's usually computationally expensive. And then what you would usually do with AR, you just perform some kind of tracking. So this means if you now look into something like a traditional SLAM system, you can actually use this in a stadium environment. And the approaches that we basically tried in the stadium, so the state-of-the-art methods, they were working not too badly. But the problem is a bit if we look into the movement patterns that people or spectators actually have in a stadium environment, they often just have these kind of movements where they they're just basically moving their phones on a circular or on a spherical movement. And this is quite a big challenge for those kind of traditional SLAM methods, because actually what you would assume is that you have a certain baseline to now perform your SLAM and getting basically your SLAM system initialized. And this was one of the challenges that we noticed, and we were basically starting with this, that you can't really assume that people are having a large enough baseline to initialize themselves. So this was the reason why we came up with this kind of spherical SLAM system. And I will not go into much detail here, but the idea is basically that you assume that you represent the movements of the users now on a sphere, and instead of having, for instance, keyframes that are located everywhere, so without any constraints, you basically now try to have keyframes that are located on a spherical representation, and this gives you additional constraints and also gives you basically enough information to initialize your SLAM model. And based on this, you can then actually just use the spherical SLAM system to do some tracking, and we did some comparison here between traditional SLAM and spherical SLAM. And in particular, in these kind of large-scale environments, we found that the spherical SLAM is way more robust compared to the traditional SLAM systems. So this is certainly something which is quite helpful for our application scenario. So, so this means now we have the localization part nearly solved. We have the tracking part solved. And the next challenge was then basically, or is still the actual visualization on a mobile client. So for instance, on a phone or the AR classes. And Wei Hong, one of the PhD students here, he is actually looking into the visualization aspects of the project. So how can we make use of a rather small display, for instance, because if we talk about a mobile phone, you have very less space that you can use for creating now statistics or displaying statistics. So one of the questions was here, how can we integrate this kind of visualization in a more smarter way? So for instance, by making use of different surfaces in the environment and integrating, for instance, statistics or charts in a way that is not that prominent. So it's basically more integrated into the actual environment, and even making use of the spatial layout. So for instance, instead of having just like a 2D or like a normal 2D bar chart representation, the idea is that you take the spatial context of this kind of charts, for instance, and take them into account when placing the content, and basically making it so a bit easier for people to understand how this data is related to the actual action on the field. So the last thing I would like to talk about, and this is basically in addition to the mobile phone and the head-worn prototypes that we have, is something which is called the indirect AR overlay. And the idea behind this is now they're looking a bit back into the this kind of aspect of the real-time player tracking. So as I was saying before, this kind of player tracking, and we have basically a couple of cameras that are mounted in a stadium where you can use computer vision in order to track where those kind of players are located on the field. But one of the challenges that we noticed back then when implementing this is the problem is here that there's like a certain delay in terms of now delivering the data that is coming from those kind of cameras and basically delivering this to the mobile phones. And in our case, I think we measured something like 200 milliseconds. And the problem is, this is no problem if you're looking into broadcast, because like a lot of the content is actually produced in post-production, and nobody will notice that there's a bit of a delay in terms of the tracking. But the problem is, if you now do this in AR, you actually have some kind of discrepancy between what you're seeing on the field and then the player tracking data that's arriving on your phone. And this is quite noticeable. So what we explored, and in addition, was to use basically not a live view of the live game, but instead using a pre-captured 360 photograph. And then basically, if you have events that you want to visualize that require, for instance, player tracking, you can then basically just put this kind of information on top of this kind of 360 representation to avoid this kind of discrepancy between the live action and your player tracking data. And you can still visualize the information that is related to the player tracking. So this is mostly about the different prototypes that we have. And what we now did was also looking into the actual user experience. So what do now users think about this, and how can they use this? And it turned out that it's kind of very challenging in terms of evaluating these kind of things, because you can't just go forth and back to the stadium and just do like all your user tests all the time. So what we did to start with, and just to collect some kind of initial feedback, was to basically set up a mini version of our stadium and creating this kind of mini stadium experiences where users still are using their mobile phones, and they get all the information displayed that is relevant to a certain match, but they basically just have it in a minified lab environment. And this was good enough for collecting some kind of initial feedback on the general visualization techniques that we developed. And then after basically getting this kind of first feedback and having some iterations going on, we were now recently also able to go into the field and test some of these kind of technologies directly on site, and basically looking into is there like a benefit in terms of now using augmented reality, and also comparing this to more traditional broadcast style visualizations. Okay, so what we basically, just to summarize this, what we figured out is that there are still a lot of challenges that need to be addressed. So for instance, the latency problem is certainly something that we still are working on. The registration, so we have basically a couple of options that are possible. They are basically allowing us to create these kind of on-site experiences, but a lot of them are still requiring some kind of additional effort in terms of making it accurate. So we're currently also looking or exploring options for using machine learning for doing the registration, and basically integrating image information and 3D model information into our data sets to just make this much more accurate, and also the whole registration process a bit more easy for like normal users. I think then the other aspect that we are basically currently looking into is the usability, and also what does it actually mean for people if they go into a stadium. Are they interested in getting this kind of additional information, and basically what is the difference between a TV broadcast experience and going on site? So do people actually want to, for instance, hold the phone up all the time, or do they want to use the phone just from time to time to get some certain information related to a certain event? Okay, so that's mostly it from my side, and I think we still have some time for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefanie, for the talk.